They didn't expect Keanu Reeves to stop. People rarely did, not in a quiet New England town where most celebrities drove straight through without rolling their windows down, let alone stepping out of the car. But one morning, in early November, under a pale grey sky and the rustle of brittle leaves, Keanu Reeves pulled over in front of an old two-story house with peeling paint and a violin in the window. He wasn't filming, he wasn't promoting anything. He was just driving alone, unshaven, in a dark wool coat and fingerless gloves, listening to a Max Richter track that had made his chest feel heavier than it should have. Something about the street made him slow, and something about that violin, resting against a faded lace curtain, strings long snapped, bow balanced beside it like a forgotten exhale, made him stop altogether. He stayed in the car at first, just watching. The house looked abandoned. The grass had grown wild around broken stepping stones, but the window was clean, not just wiped, but lovingly polished. That's when he saw her. The curtain parted slightly, and a woman, white-haired, angular, stern, looked down at him through thick glasses. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She simply stared, as if daring him to prove he was worth the pause. Keanu got out, not quickly. Slowly, the way someone moves when they're not sure why they're walking towards something, only that they are. The cold bit at his face. The wind carried the faint smell of chimney smoke. He climbed the 3 crumbling steps and stood at the porch, unsure if he should knock. He was about to turn away when the door creaked open. "I don't sell anything," the woman said before he could speak. Her voice was sharp, but not cruel. Her eyes studied him. "If you're here for the violin, it's not for sale." "I'm not," Keanu said. He removed his gloves, held them in one hand. I saw it in the window. It looked cared for." The woman raised an eyebrow, but didn't open the door further. "Do you play?" Keanu hesitated, then nodded. "A little. Enough to miss it." She looked past him, as if searching for a car that wasn't there. "You're him?" she said finally. "The actor." "I'm just someone who stopped." "You're also Keanu Reeves." He didn't answer that. She didn't need him to. She pushed the door open just enough to step onto the porch. Her cardigan was buttoned all the way up. The blue brooch on her collar gleamed like a raindrop. She stood beside him now, facing the street, arms folded. "My husband played that violin," she said, not looking at him. "Every morning, same song. He used to say it kept the wolves from forgetting we were alive." Keanu stayed quiet. "He passed 16 years ago," she added. "I keep it there because if I move it, I'll hear the silence louder." The street was quiet except for the wind. A squirrel darted across the power line. The woman looked down at Keanu's hands, calloused in a way that wasn't from acting. Her eyes softened slightly. "You said you play?" He gave the smallest nod. "I don't let people touch it," she said. "I've said no for years, but something about today feels, I don't know." She stepped back toward the door. "Wait here." She disappeared inside. Keanu stood still, unsure if he'd just been dismissed. A few minutes passed, then she returned, holding the violin case gently, as if it were still breathing. She handed it to him without a word and gestured to the bench on the porch. Keanu opened the case. Inside, the violin lay like a curled animal, fragile but proud. He could see the wear on the neck, the faint groove where fingers had lived for decades. He turned the pegs gently, tightened one string at a time, adjusted the bridge with care. The bow was old, but not broken. The rosin had hardened, but he worked it just enough. He looked at her once, a silent question. She nodded, and then, on a quiet porch in a forgotten town, Keanu Reeves played, not a complex piece, nothing flashy, just a slow, rising melody that moved like breath through cold air. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The notes trembled as if afraid to be heard again, but they came. And the woman, arms wrapped around herself, sat on the edge of the bench and listened with eyes closed. She didn't cry. Not then. But she did something more intimate. She hummed, barely audible, but there. Like she knew the notes before they arrived, like they were waiting for her. The music faded. Keanu lowered the bow. "My name's Miriam," she said quietly. "I never learned to play. He offered to teach me, but I said no. I was afraid I'd break it, afraid I'd ruin the sound." "You wouldn't have," Keanu said, eyes still on the violin. She looked at him, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth for the first time. "Neither did you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the wind move the empty trees. When Keanu stood, he handed her the violin with both hands, like returning a sacred thing. She took it and cradled it to her chest. "You're welcome to come back," she said, almost reluctantly. "Maybe I will." As he walked back to the car, she placed the violin back in the window, but this time she turned it slightly. Not to face out, but angled in, as if it were listening. Keanu drove off without turning on the radio. The melody still lingered in his mind. Not just the notes, but the way she had hummed. The way the house didn't seem so forgotten anymore. The way silence had been replaced, not with noise, but with memory. He didn't know if he'd return tomorrow or next week. But he knew he'd return because some windows aren't meant to be looked at from the outside forever. They're meant to be opened. That thought followed Keanu down the winding road that led out of the little town, across the narrow bridge with flaking paint, past the diner that hadn't updated its menu since the early 80s. He didn't drive fast. He rarely did. But this time, his foot eased off the gas even more, as if his subconscious was already finding excuses to turn back. He didn't know why that window mattered so much, or why that woman's voice had stayed with him longer than most lines of dialogue he'd ever spoken on screen. All he knew was that when he closed his eyes that night in the quiet of his rented cabin, he could still hear her humming. The next morning he returned. No announcement. No message. Just the gravel crunch of his tires pulling into the same spot across from the house. The violin was still there. But this time, the curtain was already open. Miriam was waiting on the porch. She wore the same cardigan, but today it was unbuttoned. The brooch was gone. Her hair was pinned back, and in her lap, resting gently across a folded blanket, was the violin. "I figured if you were going to come back, you wouldn't make a big deal of it," she said, without smiling. "So I didn't either." Keanu climbed the steps slowly. He nodded toward the instrument. "I didn't expect to see it again." "I didn't expect to hear it again," she replied. "But here we are." They sat in silence for a moment. The porch creaked beneath their weight. A bird chirped somewhere in the bare trees, and Miriam shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket like she was tucking in an old friend. "I told you he played every morning," she began. "That was true, but it wasn't just for us. Every Saturday, kids from the neighborhood used to come here. He taught them, for free. Said music kept your mind from rusting." Keanu looked out toward the street, imagining it alive with children, the sound of mismatched notes spilling from the porch. "They called him Mr. H," she continued. "Not Mr. Henderson, just Mr. H, like he was part mystery, part magician. He'd line them up by height, hand out sheet music even if they couldn't read it, and tell them, 'Pretend you know what you're doing. Eventually you will.'" Her lips curled slightly. That was his motto. "What happened to them?" Keanu asked. "They grew up, moved on, life happened. Some wrote, some forgot. One or two came back after the funeral, left flowers. One sent a letter, but mostly the music stopped. She looked down at the violin, ran a thumb over the edge of the scroll like it was skin. "I tried to keep it going," she admitted. "Thought maybe I'd learn, thought maybe his hands could live in mine for a while. But I couldn't do it. Every time I held it, it felt like trying to wear his shoes. Too big, too sacred." Keanu didn't push. He just listened. Miriam took a breath. "I want you to teach again." He turned to her, surprised. I know you're not him," she interrupted, "but you play, and you're kind. That's all that ever mattered to the kids. Not degrees, not technique, just someone who showed up." She looked him in the eye now. "There's a boy, lives down the block. I see him walking to school with headphones on, always tapping his fingers. I asked once what he was listening to. He said, nothing. But his hands knew otherwise." Keanu looked out at the quiet street. "Does he know you?" "No," she said, "but I know him, and that's enough for now." He didn't answer right away, but something inside him shifted, the same quiet stirring that had drawn him to the window in the first place. He didn't say yes. He just nodded, and she smiled without showing teeth. That afternoon, Keanu returned with his own violin. It wasn't polished, the case was worn, but it was his. Miriam sat on the porch while he played, not for her this time, but for the street, for anyone listening. The boy didn't come that day, but the next morning he lingered at the corner a little longer. The morning after he crossed the street. And on the fourth morning he stood at the base of the steps and said, "My name's Lucas." He was 12, quiet, wide-eyed, said he didn't know any music, but could tap rhythms from memory. Keanu handed him a pencil, told him to tap the porch rail. Lucas did. 4 counts, then 6, then 5. Not perfect, but interesting. "Do it again," Keanu said. Lucas smiled. Miriam brought out 2 folding chairs the next day, and then a third, just in case. The porch began to look like a waiting room for something sacred. Keanu didn't bring sheet music, just taught by ear. 1 note at a time, 1 name at a time. Lucas came every morning before school. Then Mia, a girl from the next street. Then Jonah, who only came on weekends but watched with a hunger Keanu recognized in himself as a boy. Soon there was a schedule. Unspoken, but kept. Miriam sat in the same place every day, knitting quietly, sometimes humming, sometimes not, but always listening, always watching. It wasn't just about the music. Keanu could feel that. It was about presence, about showing up even when no one asked, about giving time to people who didn't expect it. There were no cameras, no headlines, no autographs, just mornings and children, and old wood beneath their feet. And then one morning, Lucas didn't come. Keanu waited 15 minutes, then 30. Miriam didn't say anything, but he saw her eyes shift toward the street over and over. At the 40-minute mark, Keanu stood. "I'm going to check," he said. Miriam didn't stop him. She just reached into her knitting basket and handed him a folded note. "I wrote this last night," she said softly, "in case you needed something to carry." Keanu took it. Didn't ask what it said. He walked down the block toward the little green house where Lucas lived. Towards something unfinished. Something quiet. Because some music doesn't wait to be written. It just waits to be heard. Keanu stood outside the green house with the crooked mailbox and the sagging porch steps. The curtains were drawn, and there was no sound, not even the usual faint rhythm of Lucas tapping on his windowsill. He hesitated, unsure whether to knock. He looked down at the folded note in his coat pocket. Miriam's handwriting barely visible through the paper, soft and deliberate. He didn't open it. Not yet. Some words, like music, needed the right moment to be played. The front door creaked open before he made a move. A woman stood there, mid-40s, tired eyes, hair pulled back like she hadn't meant to leave it that way, but had simply forgotten. She recognized Keanu immediately, but didn't flinch. Fame meant little when real life pressed too close. "He's sick," she said. "Nothing serious, just a fever, but I told him no porch today." Keanu nodded, understanding. "Is he okay?" She sighed. "He's mad, says he'll forget everything if he misses even one morning. I told him that's not how music works, but maybe it is." There was a long pause. Then she added, "He talks about you a lot, about the lady too. Said the violin sounds like the inside of a memory." Keanu smiled softly. "He's not wrong." The woman stepped aside. "You want to see him?" Keanu entered the small living room. Old couch, television muted, schoolbook stacked beside a shoe rack. Lucas was on the couch under a crocheted blanket, cheeks flushed, his fingers still moving against the air in quiet rhythm. He lit up when he saw Keanu. "I didn't forget," Lucas whispered hoarsely. "I know," Keanu said, pulling over a chair. "I brought something." He reached into his coat and pulled out his own violin. Lucas sat up straighter. "I'm going to play," Keanu said, "but only if you keep time." "Just like we practiced." Lucas nodded eagerly, tapping 2 fingers against his leg, slow and steady. Keanu played a soft melody, one they had made up together. It had no name, just a feeling. Miriam called it porch light music once, something that waited for someone to come home. When he finished, Lucas looked brighter, like the fever had loosened its grip for a moment. Keanu stood. "You'll be back on the porch soon?" Lucas grinned. "You'll save my spot?" "Always." Outside, the wind had picked up. It carried that late autumn chill that hinted at winter's edge. Keanu walked back slowly, his breath clouding in front of him, Miriam's note still unopened in his pocket. When he returned, she was already waiting, rocking gently in her chair. The violin rested beside her like a sleeping animal. "Well?" she asked. "He's okay," Keanu said. "Wants to come back tomorrow." "Good," she said simply. "I worry when the rhythm breaks." He sat beside her. The porch was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. The air was full of all the mornings that had come before. He looked down at the note in his hand, then back at her. "Can I ask something?" he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Why me?" "You mean why I trusted you with his violin?" He nodded. She looked toward the window. The lace curtain moved slightly in the breeze. "Because you didn't come with a plan," she said. "You didn't offer money. You didn't say anything clever. You just listened. That's rarer than people think." She reached into her basket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to him. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. The pages yellowed, the corners soft. "His," she said. "He wrote after every lesson, names, songs, sometimes just how he felt. I stopped reading after he passed. Couldn't bear it." Keanu flipped through the pages. Each entry began the same. "Today, we listened." Toward the back he found something different. A name, Miriam, underlined twice. Below it, a line that made him stop. "One day, she'll hum the rest." Keanu looked up, heart caught between sorrow and wonder. "He wrote this?" "He believed in me more than I did," she said, almost laughing. He handed the journal back. She refused. "Number that's yours now. Maybe you'll fill the rest." The sun was beginning to set. The light hit the violin just right, catching a shine that hadn't been there before. Miriam stood slowly, her knees stiff. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "To try." She picked up the violin, not with perfect posture, not with ease, but with intention. She held it under her chin, clumsily at first, then firmer. Keanu adjusted the shoulder rest, helped her set the bow. She drew one note. It squeaked. She winced. "Again," Keanu said. This time it was smoother. Not beautiful, not yet, but real. The next few minutes passed in quiet repetition. A few notes here, a short pause, her fingers trembling, Keanu guiding her gently, never correcting, only encouraging. And then something shifted. The bow found its weight. Her hands loosened. She closed her eyes and hummed. A familiar melody, faint, fragile, but unmistakable. She played it, his song, her song now. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just listened. When she finished, she laughed softly, surprised by herself. "I thought I'd forgotten," she said. "But it was just waiting." He helped her place the violin back in its case. She held the bow a second longer before letting go. A car passed slowly on the street. Then another. Kids on bikes rode by, waving. Music from a radio echoed faintly from somewhere. The world was moving again. Keanu stood. Miriam looked at him and said, "You'll come back?" He smiled. "You already know." She nodded, satisfied. "Then I'll keep the porch warm." As he walked away, he felt lighter. Not because something was over, but because something had begun. And on that porch, behind that window, beneath that old roof, music had returned. Not in notes, not in perfect rhythm, but in the act of showing up, of trying again, because some music doesn't need an audience, it just needs someone who listens. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in the quiet power of kindness. Leave a comment below. Have you ever heard a song that brought someone back to life in your memory? Because sometimes the smallest gestures play the loudest music, and sometimes the porch light is still on, waiting for someone to come home. Thank you for listening.